When you fire the messenger for bad news, you don't fix the problem, you just blindfold the public. Those words captured the stakes of our story today. In August 2025, President Donald Trump took the unprecedented step of firing Dr. Erika McEntarfer, the commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, immediately after a disappointing jobs report. Trump blasted out on social media that the July jobs numbers were rigged in order to make the Republicans and me look bad. How sad. Insisting that the economy was actually booming. Without evidence, he accused McEntarfer, a respected economist confirmed by an 86-8 bipartisan Senate vote in 2024, of faking the data for political purposes. Critics across the spectrum reacted with alarm. The message from experts was clear. Undermining the independence of our statistical agencies isn't just another partisan scuffle, it strikes at the heart of democracy. When official numbers become political playthings, what happens to our shared reality? In this episode, we dive into the recent firing of the U.S. labor statistics chief and explore the far-reaching consequences when governments undermine those trusty, if unglamorous, organs of fact. From Washington, D.C. to Moscow, from the Great Depression to the digital age, by the end, we will see why data integrity is a cornerstone of free society and how easily that cornerstone can crack when power trumps truth. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and let's take bets on who will become the next commissioner of BLS in the comments below. This administration is well known for picking people with experience, so let's have some fun and stick around to the end to find out my top pick at the end. Here's a hint. Now, let's watch and reflect. Let's start with the always breaking news. In late July 2025, the BLS released its monthly jobs report, showing the U.S. added only 73,000 jobs, far fewer than economists expected. Even more troubling, BLS revised the previous 2 months' figures downward by a combined 258,000 jobs, revealing that the economy had been weaker than initially reported. These revisions pointed to a broader slowdown. Economic output and consumer spending had also cooled in the first half of 2025. To any president, especially one who campaigned on economic prowess, such numbers would be unwelcome. But what happened next was something new in American politics. Just days after the report, President Trump summarily fired BLS Commissioner Erika McEntarfer. McEntarfer, a career economist appointed in 2024, was in the middle of a fixed 4-year term meant to insulate the BLS from political whims. Trump, however, showed no regard for that norm. He claimed without proof that she had faked employment numbers before the 2024 election to hurt him, and that the latest weak report was rigged to undermine his return to office. Quote, "I've had issues with the numbers for a long time. I believe the numbers were phony. So I fired her, and I did the right thing. Hell yeah," Trump told reporters. On Truth Social, he announced he was replacing McEntarfer with, quote, "someone much more competent and qualified," saying important numbers like this must be fair and accurate. They can't be manipulated for political purposes. I love Truth Social. It's the new New York Times. Ironically, in the act of claiming to protect data from manipulation, Trump was widely seen as openly manipulating the data process itself. The backlash was bipartisan. McEntarfer's own response was measured. She posted that it had been the, quote, "honor of my life to serve as commissioner of BLS alongside the many dedicated civil servants tasked with measuring a vast and dynamic economy." But others were more blunt. Quote, "If the president is firing the statistician because he doesn't like the numbers, but they are accurate, then that's a problem," said Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, adding that it's not the statistician's fault if the numbers are not what the president had hoped for. Also, McEntarfer is legit. She holds a doctorate in economics from Virginia Tech and is highly experienced. She's worked at the Department of the Treasury and the Census Bureau. However, today, I guess being qualified means you aren't, in fact, qualified. To put this in perspective, no U.S. president in modern history had ever fired the head of the BLS over a disagreement. That is why this incident has been described as shooting the messenger and even acting out Putin's playbook. It's not just about one official or one report. It's about whether Americans can trust the numbers that inform everything from interest rates to grocery prices. To understand why that trust is so important, we need to look at the bigger picture of data in society. In our daily lives, we take for granted a data trust compact, an unwritten pact that government agencies will publish accurate, nonpartisan statistics about the economy, society, and public health. And in return, we, the people, and businesses and investors, use those numbers as a shared foundation of reality. Agencies like the BLS, the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and others exist to gather just the facts. How many people are employed? What's the inflation rate? How fast is the economy growing? So that we can debate policy with a common baseline of truth. Without trustworthy data, policymaking becomes a shot in the dark. Business planning turns into guesswork, and public debates devolve into fact-free shouting matches. Consider how widely BLS data is used. The Federal Reserve adjusts monetary policy, like interest rates, based on employment and wage statistics from BLS. Congress crafts fiscal policy and stimulus packages looking at job growth and price indexes. State and local governments use BLS data to guide workforce programs. Businesses, large and small, rely on official economic figures to make investment and hiring decisions. The media reports the numbers as news headlines each month, shaping public perception of the economy. Even ordinary Americans making decisions, like whether to switch jobs or buy a house or who to vote for. Now, imagine if those numbers can no longer be trusted. The consequences of corrupting official data are far-reaching. Resources could be misallocated on a massive scale. For example, a state might pour money into job training programs for an industry that in reality is shrinking because doctored data said it was booming. Investors might make millions of wrong decisions pricing stocks or bonds incorrectly until a harsh correction hits when reality reasserts itself. Voters could be misled about whether policies are working. If unemployment is actually rising, but the published figures say all is well, voters can't hold leaders accountable and problems fester. We've been fortunate in the US that historically our federal statistical agencies have maintained high standards of integrity. They are staffed by career professionals insulated as much as possible from partisan influence, and their methodologies are public and subject to peer review. Revisions to data, like those job numbers, are normal and expected as more information comes in, not signs of manipulation. Indeed, the BLS regularly revises its initial monthly job estimates because it gets more complete payroll data over time. On average, since 2003, the revision is about plus or minus 51,000 jobs. Understanding this process is key. Revisions aren't correction of lies, they are improvements in accuracy. As more information is gathered, better estimates can be made. To accuse the BLS of rigging simply because the numbers change is to display a deep ignorance or willful rejection of how statistical science works. Corrupting the process, on the other hand, would be new and dangerous. If BLS directors are pressured to fudge numbers or if staff face firing for producing politically inconvenient data, the whole system of trust collapses. As William Beach, who was Trump's first-term Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner, warned, this kind of interference undermines the credibility of federal economic statistics, which are the cornerstone of intelligent economic decision-making by businesses, families, and policymakers. To drive the point home, let's explore some historical parallels, times and places where leaders did undermine statistical integrity or abuse data for politics. These events show that today's crisis is not entirely new, and that things can get much worse if we are not careful. Consider the Stalinist Soviet Union, where truth itself was often treated as a state enemy. In Stalin's USSR of the 1930s through 40s, statistics and science had to conform to communist ideology. The regime outright banned the concept of randomness and uncertainty in data, because under rigid central planning doctrine, nothing could occur by accident. Stalin's theoreticians decreed that the law of large numbers and random deviation were false theories, incompatible with Marxist certainty. In practice, this meant statistical journals were shut down, And even world-renowned statisticians like Andrei Kolmogorov, a pioneer of modern probability, were forced to abandon research or switch to politically acceptable topics. The very tools needed to objectively measure the economy, sampling, probability, honest surveys, were discarded or distorted because the party insisted that reality must match the plan. When reality didn't cooperate, Stalin simply suppressed the data or the data keepers. The most infamous example is the 1937 Soviet census. Stalin expected a robust population growth. Instead, the census, conducted by professional statisticians, revealed a much smaller population, a result of millions of deaths from famine and purges. The response? Stalin declared the census results defective and had the senior statisticians in charge arrested and executed for treasonous falsification. A new census was done in 1939, with results doctored to be more flattering, and for 2 decades the USSR published almost no population data at all. As one scholarly analysis noted, from 1936 to 1956, very little statistical data was published openly in the Soviet Union. If numbers didn't fit the propaganda, they were simply kept secret. Falsification did occur. Local officials would fake reports to please Moscow. But more common was the policy of not collecting or releasing unsuitable data. The result was massive gaps in knowledge. Even Soviet economists and planners often had no reliable figures about basic metrics, like harvest yields or factory output. A planned economy without trustworthy stats is like a person trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded. And it wasn't just economics. Under Stalin, entire fields of science were subverted by politics. Genetics was banned via Lysenkoism because Mendelian genetics and its statistical basis was deemed bourgeois and inconvenient, leading the USSR's agriculture down a pseudoscientific dead end for decades. Sociology was heavily censored and often outright eliminated, since honest social surveys might reveal discontent that contradicted the official narrative. The ripple effects of these policies were disastrous. Food shortages worsened because truth about crop failures was suppressed. Public health crises, like famine, deepened because accurate data that would inform a response was treated as a state secret. In short, Stalin demonstrated in the extreme what happens when a regime demands truth to be whatever the leader says it is. Objective numbers disappear, and with them, the ability to rationally govern and improve people's lives. It's a dark lesson in the politics of data. Under authoritarianism, 2 plus 2 can equal 5 if the party needs it to, but the real world will eventually exact a heavy price. Lest we think this is just a tale of 2 superpowers, consider 2 modern countries that learned the hard way that cooking the books leads to catastrophe: Greece and Argentina. Greece, in the early 2000s, famously misreported its national financial statistics, which helped it enter the Eurozone under false pretenses. For years, Greek governments understated budget deficits and debt levels. The truth came out around 2009-2010. Greece's deficit had been far higher than reported, and its debt far more unsustainable. This deception meant that corrective actions were delayed until Greece was already in a full-blown debt crisis. This is very important because statistics demonstrate trends and provide us with numbers to project coming events. The effects are not necessarily felt till later. A massive rise in unemployment followed. Amongst youth, nearly 55% by mid-2012, and 20,000 Greeks have been made homeless during 2011. Unprecedented healthcare cuts occurred, excluding many from treatment. And these events will not only affect those who lived it, but subsequent generations as well. When the crisis hit, trust in Greece's data was so low that European authorities essentially took over the numbers. In 2010, a respected statistician, Andreas G., not going to try and pronounce his name, I'll provide the source in the description below though, was appointed to lead a revamped Greek statistical agency, Elstat, and clean up the data. He applied international standards and revealed the real deficit figures, finally giving an accurate account of Greece's finances. You'd think he'd be thanked for righting the ship. Instead, he became a scapegoat. Politicians whose predecessors had cooked the books accused him of treason for supposedly overstating the deficit. In a twist, Greece prosecuted its truth-telling statistician on charges of falsifying data, when in fact he had exposed the previous falsifications. For over 8 years, he was dragged through the courts, hit with charges like damaging the state, and even a conviction for slander, for defending his work. International statistical bodies were horrified. Multiple professional societies and Nobel-winning economists spoke out in his support. Eventually, the European Union and IMF accepted that his numbers were correct. In fact, those accurate stats were the basis for Greece's bailout programs. But the damage of years of false data was done. Greece endured a severe austerity regime, public trust in government was shattered, and the economy suffered a depression. The lesson? Pretending things are better than they are only delays the reckoning and often makes it worse. Falsifying national statistics delayed reforms and nearly wrecked Greece's economy. And even when reality was acknowledged, the truth tellers were persecuted to deflect blame. Argentina offers a similar story with a twist. In the late 2000s, under President Nestor Kirchner, and later his wife, President Cristina Fernandez, Argentina's government started manipulating inflation and economic data for political gain. Argentina has a history of high inflation, so in 2007, the government fired the professional statisticians at its National Statistics Institute, INDEC, and replaced them with political appointees. Suddenly, Argentina's official inflation rate miraculously dropped on paper. Love it when that happens. Problem solved. They could have just done what my dad taught me. Only write down numbers in pencil, son, so you can go back and change them later. Thanks, Dad. I treasure your advice. Independent economists estimated inflation was around 25% annually, but the government claimed it was about 10%. To maintain this fiction, his administration went so far as to fine and criminalize independent analysts who published real inflation estimates. They even passed laws to penalize newspapers for printing non-government numbers. For a while, the government fooled nobody but itself. Argentine unions negotiated wage increases based on the real inflation, not the fake figures. And that's a very big point. As a union member, I know we operate under collective bargaining agreements that are negotiated based on cost of living and inflation rates. If we operate off bad numbers, our union members' standard of living decreases. In 2013, things came to a head when the International Monetary Fund censored Argentina, effectively a global rebuke since the IMF relies on member countries to provide honest data. The IMF gave Argentina an ultimatum: start producing credible inflation and GDP data or face expulsion from the fund. By 2014, Argentina had to overhaul its methodology and eventually admitted the earlier numbers were bogus. Fast forward, in 2015, a new government took over and fully restored INDEC's integrity. And in 2019, an Argentine court even convicted a former official, Moreno, for his role in falsifying data, sentencing him to jail for statistics manipulation. The damage, though, was done. Argentina's period of data fakery correlated with the loss of investor confidence, currency crises, and a prolonged economic slump. Well, once trust is lost, it's hard to win back. The firing of a stats chief was perhaps the most dramatic example of politicizing data in recent US memory, but it didn't come out of nowhere. In recent years, there have been subtler attempts to erode the independence of data agencies and the civil servants who produce our numbers. Let's highlight a few. In late 2020, during his last months in office the first time around, President Trump issued an executive order creating a new federal employee category called Schedule F. This odd-sounding change would have allowed the administration to reclassify thousands of career civil servants in policy-related positions as essentially at-will employees, stripping them of civil service protections. In plain English, Schedule F was a plan to make it much easier to fire federal experts wholesale and replace them with loyalists. Who might that include? Potentially, economists, statisticians, budget analysts, anyone whose work contradicts the president's narrative. The order was rescinded by President Biden in 2021, but many in the current Trump-aligned GOP have voiced intentions to revive Schedule F if they get the chance. In fact, a Heritage Foundation-led plan called Project 2025 explicitly lays out an agenda to purge federal agencies of staff deemed not on board with the president's program. While proponents call this draining the swamp, former officials and governance experts call it the Schedule F threat to democracy, warning it would massively expand presidential power to manipulate agencies that were designed to be nonpartisan. An independent statistical agency is only independent as long as its people can operate without fear of political retribution. Another subtle way to undermine credible data is by kneecapping the mechanisms that ensure quality. In 2025, the Trump administration disbanded the Federal Statistics Advisory Committee, a group of experts that for years helped U.S. statistical agencies improve their methods and flagged any issues with data integrity. This inherently removes an early warning system that could alert the public to political interference or methodology problems. There have also been budget cuts and hiring freezes targeting statistical programs. For instance, proposals to cut funding for the Economic Research Service or to make it harder for the Census Bureau to hire field workers. Starving agencies of resources can be a quiet strategy to diminish their accuracy or responsiveness. If, say, the BLS doesn't have enough staff to conduct its surveys thoroughly, errors and delays mount, which can then be cynically used by critics to claim the data is garbage and justify overhauling the agency with partisan leadership. It's a vicious cycle. Constrain the agency, then attack its performance. Earlier, we noted how Trump's actions echo tactics used by authoritarian regimes. The comparisons are not hyperbole, they are drawn from concrete parallels. In Russia, President Putin has spent years tightening control over economic statistics. The Federal Statistics Service, Rosstat, was once semi-autonomous, but over time the Kremlin pressured it to produce rosier numbers. According to Time magazine, they documented how Rosstat, under Putin, would, quote, bend over backward to correct bad numbers and bury unflattering statistics to suit the Kremlin's narrative. For example, if unemployment ticked up or real incomes fell, Rosstat might revise the methodology, gotta love it, or simply stop publishing certain indicators. Recently facing sanctions and economic strain, Russia even stopped releasing some trade and investment data, making it harder to assess the true impact on its economy. In China, skepticism of official data is so routine that observers compile alternate indexes like satellite images of factory activity or proxy measures like electricity usage to get a reality check on GDP growth. Even China's own premier at one point reportedly admitted he didn't trust the GDP figures and looked at other metrics. This is exactly the scenario we fear when people must rely on crude proxies and outside guesses because official data is politically varnished. Transparency dies, and corruption often thrives. The United States historically has been a bulwark against this trend. We have been a model of how to keep politics out of the data, the gold standard, so to say. That's why these recent moves are so concerning. They represent a potential inflection point where the U.S. could slide from being a leader in reliable statistics to just another country where numbers serve those in power. As Tara Sinclair, George Washington University economist, warned in March 2025, quote, "We have this anchored expectation of quality data coming out of the U.S. And according to the panel of attendees at an economic panel discussion, there is growing worry about political pressure being brought to bear on agencies like BLS. If that anchor drops, we will drift into dangerous waters." Amid all this, there's a critical role for media literacy and public vigilance. In an age of spin and misinformation, we, the people, have to ask some fundamental questions whenever we encounter a headline number. First up, where do these numbers come from? It sounds basic, but always consider the source. Is that unemployment rate from a long-established nonpartisan agency using transparent methods, or from a politician's rally speech? Is a claim about crime rates backed by FBI statistics, or someone on the internet said so? Trust but verify the validity of data. Our story today is a reminder that even sources we trusted can come under political pressure, so it's okay to dig a little, read the methodology notes, and see if independent experts validate the figures. Next up, what are their motivations and intentions? This is a twist and my personal favorite. Yes, skepticism is healthy, but also ask, who benefits if public confidence in official data is destroyed? Often the beneficiary is whoever wants to replace fact with narrative. In the BLS saga, for example, consider that President Trump stood to benefit politically if he could dismiss all unfavorable economic news as fake. By sowing doubt about neutral data, he can claim any bad number is cooked against him, a convenient escape hatch. So when someone urges you to reject all official sources as deep state lies, ask yourself, are they trying to free you with truth or capture you with propaganda? Total cynicism, believe nothing, can be just as exploitable as gullibility. It's an inoculation against everything you don't want to hear. It's no coincidence that authoritarian regimes tell their citizens that all information is suspect except the leaders. We see this today in the current trend of don't trust the experts. Next, what happens if we lose a shared reality? This is the big one. A democracy relies on a baseline of common facts. You know, reality. We can debate what to do about unemployment, but we must first agree on what unemployment is. If every tribe has its own set of alternative facts, society can't productively debate or solve problems. It will splinter into echo chambers. In our context, if half of America is convinced any negative job report is a hoax, and conversely, another chunk believes any positive report must be massaged, then no economic policy discussion can even start from reality. We end up fighting phantoms. So, think about media literacy not just as spotting falsehoods, but as protecting the sources of truth we still have. That means supporting quality journalism and independent data gathering, and being cautious about claims that everything is a lie. Ultimately, we should foster a culture where data is a public good, something we expect our leaders to provide us faithfully, and something we as citizens feel responsible to understand in context. Call it a data trust compact. Government data must be truthful and transparently produced, and in return, the public gives it a fair hearing, even if the truth is uncomfortable. When that compact is broken, either by the government misleading or by the public dismissing everything, democracy suffers. In this story, the burden clearly lies on the government side. Firing statisticians, manipulating reports, or slashing data programs break the trust compact in a top-down way. Our job in response is to hold them to account and insist on the truth, which brings us to an important point. Not everyone will see this issue the same way. Some may shrug and say, hey, all administrations massage numbers. What's the big deal? It's crucial to address those counterarguments head on. Let's tackle a few possible pushbacks or cynical takes one might hear about the BLS firing and broader worries. 1. They are just a bunch of swamp bureaucrats. Of course they are biased. We've all heard it. The swamp, the swamp. Does anyone have a name for those who are in this swamp? Probably not, and even more likely not if you're the one using it. It's become fashionable in some circles to assume that career government experts are secretly partisan or pushing an agenda. Certainly, no human institution is 100% free of bias, but the integrity of agencies like BLS is not based on trusting individuals. It's based on trusting process, specifically a methodology, and I invite you to read it and see why. For example, here's a quote from an actual BLS report. There is about a 90% chance or level of confidence that an estimate based on a sample will differ by no more than 1.6 standard errors from the true population value because of sampling error. BLS analyses are generally conducted at the 90% level of confidence. That means it's normal for numbers to change, and it makes sense that they do as more information is gathered. And that's a good thing because future predictions are then made on better numbers. This process is not hidden. It is not abnormal. It's stated in every report. Just because you hear it does not make it true, and just because you may not understand it doesn't mean others don't. This consistent theme in the media that you can't trust authorities is BS. We live in a world now where people just say shit and you believe it. Not because it's true, but because it reinforces your own beliefs. The point is, the BLS has procedures, checks, and audits designed precisely to minimize the influence of any one person's bias. For example, jobs reports are compiled by teams of career economists and statisticians, not by the commissioner alone. The data collection follows methodologies that are published and reviewed. If any BLS employee tried to, say, fake a survey, it would be very hard to do and likely caught by others. The broader notion that everyone manipulates data is a false equivalence. Yes, politicians will spin data, highlighting the good, downplaying the bad, but spinning the interpretation is wildly different from altering the source of the data. The former is debate, the latter is deception. In short, dismissing all official data as swamp lies is like refusing to trust thermometers because you think the weathermen are hyping the heat. If we abandon the instruments that keep us honest, we are left with only hot air. And 2, if the data was wrong or constantly revised, maybe Trump had a point. Maybe they were doing a bad job and deserved firing. It's true that the July jobs reports had large revisions, and Trump seized on that to claim incompetence or foul play. But as we explained earlier, revisions are a normal part of the statistical process, not evidence of wrongdoing. Calling a revision a mistake is like calling a mid-course correction by a ship's navigator in error. It's actually adjusting to get on the right path. Moreover, if there truly were performance issues at an agency, there are established channels for improvement and accountability that don't involve knee-jerk firings. The BLS commissioner is appointed to a fixed term to ensure continuity. If an administration thinks methods need updating, they can fund new research, convene expert panels, like that advisory committee that was unfortunately disbanded, or in extreme cases, remove a commissioner for cause with a clear justification. None of that happened here. By all accounts, McEntarfer was a respected professional following standard procedure. She is highly qualified and has earned her authority, and that's something we need to bring back and respect again in society. So, where do we go from here? We've outlined a pretty stark challenge: the integrity of data. Those dry numbers on which so much depends is under threat from political forces. But there are ways to push back and protect our statistics of democracy. First, demand and support institutional safeguards. After the McEntarfer firing, some lawmakers proposed legislation to make it harder for a president to remove a BLS commissioner without cause, effectively enshrining more independence for statistical agencies, similar to how the Federal Reserve Chair can't be fired at will. Supporting such reforms could provide legal guardrails. Oversight committees in Congress should also investigate cases of interference. Second, strengthen whistleblower protections for government data scientists and statisticians. Whistleblower laws exist, but we may need them specifically tuned for data integrity, so that if, say, a higher-up pressures an analyst to doctor a report, that analyst can safely report it. We want an environment where the professionals on the inside feel empowered to hold the line. In the past, brave civil servants have leaked information about censored reports. For instance, during the previous administration, some career scientists released climate data that was being suppressed. Whistleblower support and independent inspector generals can keep an eye on Schedule F type plans. Third, civic education and media need to highlight these issues, not bury them. Let's be honest, integrity of the statistical system is not a sexy headline for the average news consumer, but it's the skeleton that holds up so many of those sexy headlines. We in the media and education sphere should treat attacks on statistical agencies with the same seriousness we treat attacks on the courts or the press. They are all part of the ecosystem of democracy. This podcast episode itself is an example of trying to make this topic accessible and pressing. Encourage your friends to pay attention the next time there's controversy about the numbers. If you hear someone casually say, "Oh, all those numbers are made up anyway," challenge that cynicism. Explain what we have discussed about the process and why it matters. In fact, just ask anyone you may disagree with why. If they don't have an actual reason, it will encourage them to find one, a real one, other than a soundbite. Fourth, support independent watchdogs and international norms. Organizations like the American Statistical Association and the International Statistical Institute have been vocal in condemning political interference. They spoke out strongly in the Greek and Argentine cases. We can pressure our government to adhere to the UN fundamental principles of official statistics, which the US has endorsed, stating that official statistics must be produced professionally and without political pressure. It might sound abstract, but these international standards give reformers a reference point. If an administration violates them, it can be called out on the world stage. Finally, and most broadly, recognize that this is part of a larger battle for institutional integrity. The fight for honest data is akin to the fight for an independent judiciary, a free press, and free academia. In all cases, the pattern of authoritarian-leaning leaders is to undermine any institution that can challenge them with truth or facts. Today, it's the BLS and economic stats. Tomorrow, it could be the election results themselves, or the independence of judges, or an era of alternative facts. My bad, all those have already happened. As we close, let's reflect on that powerful line we started with and bring its meaning into focus now. Numbers don't lie, people do. And when they fire the people who count the numbers, they are not fixing reality, they are trying to replace it. Our job as citizens is to keep our eyes open and our blindfolds off. We must insist on seeing the problem, however ugly it may be, rather than accept a comforting fairy tale. Because trust in numbers is really trust in ourselves. Trust that we can handle the truth and act on it. Let's make sure those we hire to serve us in government remember that we want the truth in our ledgers, not lies. After all, you can't build a great nation on broken data any more than you can build a house on sand. So, time for a little fun. Who will President Trump put into that position? I'm betting Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy. He will make all the numbers fit just right. Thank you for listening to Speak Online. And until next time, stay curious, stay readical, and stay informed. Also, please visit our website, speakonline.com. You can support us there for as little as $3 a month, or you can sign up for our newsletter for free. All links are in the description below.